Uh, Let me start first with that article. So you describe this decade as the a one when centuries can happen. Why?
The short answer is there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
You have we've seen it with the war in Europe.
Yeah.
We see the rise in friction and tension between the United States and China. We've not been able to find a formula for managing U.S.-Chinese relations.
Mm-hmm.
North Korea continues to increase its nuclear
Yeah.
arsenal.
Mm-hmm.
Iran is moving in the direction of what you might call nuclear-related capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
You have in your part of the world what you just described as hot spots or situations.
Okay.
Pakistan is increasingly a hot
Mm-hmm.
situation. You have a climate change where the world is not gaining on it. We just had a pandemic. Meanwhile, the United States is increasingly divided and preoccupied with itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the other night when the president spoke in the State of the Union, you saw how much of his speech was focused internally, domestically.
Yep.
Very little focused internationally.
Mm-hmm.
So you add all this up, you've got a lot of challenges to order, to stability in the world, be they geopolitical challenges or global challenges. And the United States is less willing and able to play the kind of role it has played since World War II, and certainly since the end of the Cold War. So you add all this up, there's a lot to worry about, and this has the potential to be a decade that determines a lot of history for decades to come.
Okay. So, do you think that, or are you among those who are anticipating World War III?
No, look, I'm not in the predictions business. I'm not smart enough to predict. So I'm not anticipating or predicting anything.
But do you think that this is something that might happen?
I don't know
the probability.
What do you mean by World War III?
I mean, they think that things in Russia will be escalated to the degree that the guy will use his nuclear weapon.
I think it's unlikely. And I think even if he were to use a nuclear weapon or device, I think it would be in a very limited fashion. So no, I don't think it leads to World War III with Russia. I don't think Russia's in a position to challenge NATO or the United States. Russia can't defeat Ukraine.
Yeah.
So
you think that Russia cannot defeat Ukraine?
No, I'm not sure Ukraine can defeat Russia either.
Yeah.
Which is why I fear this war could go on for some time. But no, I don't think we're heading towards World War III with Russia. I'm actually more concerned in a few years, not now, in a few years, about the United States and China. Whether there's something over Taiwan, which seems to me to have the potential to be a very dangerous catalyst of a friction and even a conflict between the United States and China. I'm not predicting it. I can't sit here and tell you it cannot happen. I think it's imaginable. But the good news is we have years to try to head it off, to deter it. But that will depend upon how successful we are at building up our deterrence and how persuaded China is that to use force would be a major mistake. So we're still, I think we're several years away from any decisive moment with involving the United States, China, Taiwan, Japan, but it could well happen this decade. We could have some very big decisions made this decade.
But do you think that eventually China will topple down United States from its leadership, global leadership?
The biggest threat to American global leadership is America. It's not China. It's our internal challenges. China has enormous internal challenges of its own: demographic, economic, political, environmental. It's a long list. So no, I'm not worried about what China can do to the American law. I'm more worried about what we ourselves might do. It's the reason, for example, even though I am an international relations specialist, I write about foreign policy. My most recent book is about American domestic politics.
Yep.
Then that's, again, I find that when I look out over the next 10 years, that worries me more than anything external.
So you think the internal issue is for United States is more serious, more damaging, and since you refer to the last speech about your president's speech about the union, I noticed that there was not even one single reference to Middle East.
The Middle East, you notice
yes.
that? Isn't that fascinating? Think about it. Here we are 30 years approximately, just over 3 decades since the end of the Cold War. And the biggest geopolitical involvements and investments for the United States were in the Middle East.
Yes.
Beginning with the Gulf War, when Saddam invaded
absolutely
Kuwait.
Yep.
Obviously, the 2003 the war in your country. Afghanistan, you might call the greater Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
You had all the diplomatic effort involving Israel and several of its neighbors, as well as the Palestinians. And the other night, the president didn't mention the Middle East. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's a real sign of two things. One is that, again, I mean, the speech didn't give a lot of emphasis to foreign policy to begin with.
Yeah.
And second of all, even within foreign policy, the two areas he focused on were Russia's war with Ukraine and China.
China.
And those are the two biggest. And he talked about climate change. He talked about some other things, but essentially geopolitical challenges and global challenges. But he didn't include the Middle East or North Korea or Latin America. It was quite interesting.
Yeah, but I mean that also can be interpreted in a different way. I mean, that means that this administration is more focused on the internal issue, and you have referred to that.
Yes, sir.
I mean, you need more improvement
Yes,
on
sir.
the internal. So, do you think that
the administration,
this administration will?
Well, this administration is focused on, and in part because that's what the American people are more focused on. The president talked about a lot of economic issues, about rebuilding our ability to manufacture, and so forth. So the president was talking about the issues that a lot of middle-class Americans are focused on, and there's a big competition between the two parties, the Republican and Democratic parties, for the allegiance of the middle class. So a lot of the speech was aimed to basically send a message. The president wanted to send the message that he and the Democrats are the party to trust when it comes to the interests of middle-class Americans. That's what the speech was about.
Since you are talking about the middle class, do you think that there is still an active middle class in the United States?
Yes, sir.
Or it has been sectorized? I mean, every time I come to United States, and I usually come twice or 3 times a year, I can see United States heading in the same direction that Iraq is right now, which is more sectarianism. Instead of religious sectarian, we have this Democrat, Republican, and there is huge polarization. Don't you think so? And that's why the middle class, I mean, I doubt of there is a real middle class right now.
No, I disagree with you. There's a middle class. A
Yeah.
middle class is more, to me, it's more of an economic concept. You know, we measure it with certain types of per capita or family income. It's also a certain mentality about interests and values. But yes, we're politically polarized, absolutely. But the middle class goes in different directions politically. Often the issues are less to do with economics in some cases than they do with culture, social issues.
Yep.
And we see big divisions there over issues like abortion or guns. So in certain parts of the country, middle class voters have certain views on social issues. Other parts of the country, no. Again, the middle class right now is very much sought after, particularly of not just white middle class, but African American middle class, Hispanic middle class. And the Republicans are trying to make inroads more on the African American and Hispanic middle class, which have traditionally been Democratic, and the Democrats, who lost some of the white middle class to the Republicans, are trying to bring them back. And that's what you're seeing going on, and we'll see where it goes. But yeah, well, I think it's quite something. We'll see where it goes.
So other than the environment, I cannot see an agreement between middle class in the United States on certain issues.
The environment's not one of them, because there's big differences on what to do about.
So even the environment, they are not agree. So
no, sure. No, yeah. I mean, Republicans tend to be very skeptical of making a priority out of dealing with climate change. Democrats are much more interested. No, at the moment, a lot of differences. I think probably both sides want to protect what we call entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, medical insurance, but big differences otherwise.
But on social values, norms, etc.
The big differences.
So here is one of the most interesting, I think, question for at least Middle East intellectuals. Mm-hmm. There is a big debate about what are the values, what are the norms, what are the symbols that United States are trying to export to the entire world. Right now, as you know, there are two extremes. One, the extreme new liberal values with homosexuality, with all these things coming with it. And we have the far right on the other side with the populism and all these things. So people there saying that United States used to lead by example. It was the dream of many young people. Right now, it isn't like that anymore, for at least for the Middle Easterns. What do you think about that?
It pains me to hear this.
Yes?
Of course. The idea was the goal here, the idea here, is that we would be a democracy, a society, an economy that others would respect and admire. And the hope was always that our success here would lead people around the world to say, we admire that.
Yep.
We want to be more like that ourselves.
Yep.
And I always thought that was the best way to promote democracy.
Yeah.
Not to give speeches, but just set an example.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me would be the most persuasive thing we could do. And the problem now, and I take what you say seriously, and as I said, it hurts me.
Yeah.
That the example we are setting is not an example that a lot of the world finds attractive. Why would the rest of the world want to have this amount of guns?
Mm-hmm.
Why would the rest of the world want to have 60 or 70,000 deaths a year from fentanyl? Why would the rest of the world want to have this political division where we can't get important things accomplished? So I hear what you're saying, and
yeah. So what do you think is the solution to that?
Well,
to bring back?
I'm very careful about using the word solution.
Or
that's too
options.
ambitious for me.
The options.
Again, that's why I've written this book. I don't think there's any easy or simple ways to change or improve things because our politics won't allow it. Most of the even good ideas now, it's very hard to get them adopted because we're so divided. Mm-hmm. So what I am trying to do is change things. It will take time, but change things in American politics that will increase the probability or the possibility that good ideas have a chance of succeeding. And that's why I'm trying to, I'm writing and speaking about how Americans need to act towards one another, about certain behaviors, certain attitudes. I think we need to do a better job of teaching our own history in the schools, civics. I believe we need to encourage national service. I think religious leaders have a role to play, business leaders, parents, teachers, educators. I think it's going to take time. where our society is facing real significant difficulties.
But why you reach this point? Why do you think? Yes.
It's a good question. I think quite a few reasons. One is people forget this government of ours is about 2.5 centuries old. When we were founded, this was a country of 3 million people. Now we're a country of 333 million people.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't kept up. I think social media has made it more difficult. Everybody lives in a little separate social media world.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with cable television and radio. Everybody now, I call it, everybody lives in a world of narrowcasting,
Mm-hmm.
not in a world of broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
The way we fund our politics, we've weakened political parties. So every politician now can become his or her own political party, raise money from supporters, and often the more extreme they are, the more support they get. I think our economic problems have made a lot of people disillusioned with democracy here.
Mm-hmm.
I think the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan made people very disillusioned with what elites were often recommending. So I think we're in the situation we're in for many different reasons. It's been growing for a long time.
What about your educational system?
I think we have real problems with the quality of public education.
Mm-hmm.
It's not nearly good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we don't teach, one of the things we don't teach or don't teach well is our own political story. We don't teach why democracy is valuable. We don't teach enough about what it takes for democracies to succeed. But I think our public education system is failing because in too many parts of the country, indeed, where we often need the best education, it's where the resources aren't there to provide the best education.
Yeah.
And as a result, we tend to perpetuate some of the inequality in our society.
Okay. Let me go back to.
I got about 4 more. I've got to do a television thing in a minute, so I apologize.
Okay.
I
just want to ask about in your recent article you mentioned that the circumstances of 1990 when Saddam invaded Kuwait
Yes, sir.
is not there anymore, and
Right.
so you think that it's not because only the weakness of United States, but the uprising of other powers.
Yes,
Can you?
Yes, I think there's the world of 1990 when Saddam invaded Kuwait. I was at the White House then. I was the Middle East advisor to President Bush at that time.
Mm.
So I was rather involved with that. Indeed, I was in your country just a few months before. I was in your country that May of 1990. That was a world the United States held tremendous advantages. Soviet Union was essentially disintegrating. China was still relatively underdeveloped, and so forth. This was a world the United States dominated.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, we've been talking a lot about our domestic challenges here, but the rest of the world, to some extent, has recovered. You've seen China
Mm-hmm.
is now the world's second largest economy.
Yeah.
Russia is militarily certainly recovered. We live in a world now where a lot of countries and other have all sorts of power: military power, cyber power, economic power, what have you, minerals power. So the United States still may be the single most powerful, wealthy country in the world, but our relative position has deteriorated, less because of our own problems and more because of, as you would say, what my friend Fareed Zakaria called the rise of the rest.
Fareed Zakaria, yeah. Okay, so what about Iran? Last question. What do you think?
In the short run,
this administration toward Iran, what do you think?
Well, again, I think the in the short run, it looks as though the regime will survive.
Mm.
Yeah, right there. It looks like the regime will survive, but the regime is in terrible shape economically, terrible shape,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not going to be. The security forces stood by the regime, stood by the system, for now.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see about the future. Iran is still active in the region in many unhelpful ways, many destabilized ways, and I worry about their nuclear ambitions. So I think there's still going to have to be some very big decisions made by Israel, the United States, about what to do about Iran's nuclear capabilities and ambitions. But the 2015 agreement is dead. That agreement.
So
is
you
dead.
think that it is dead?
Yes, sir. I think it's dead.
Okay.
So I think the real question is, how do we manage Iran's ambitions without that agreement? It was a question that would have happened in a couple of years anyway. It's just come sooner now because we're all out of the agreement.
So you think eventually that power might be used?
I don't know, and it's a question of whether it would be used. There's also a question now whether it could be used effectively. Whether there's questions out there. I mean, you would know this about what Iran's capabilities are, and the ability of outsiders to reach them, because the capabilities are scattered around the country. They're underground. You've also got a lot of intellectual capabilities you can't eliminate. The Iranian scientists are very advanced in this area. So I think Iran has advanced. And we have to, I think all of us have to make, but particularly the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, have to decide how to deal with that. And I think that's going to emerge as a big question.
And you think that there is general